here I am again at my little table in front of this miserable cafe. Well, if you wish to go in, put your money in the box, this little box, this one right here. But before you go in, I wish to have a word with you. My uncle was the greatest wood player in all of Ankara. But do you hear what's coming out that door? The drugs have affected their minds. It is pure crap. It makes me spill my coffee.
Good evening, and welcome back to the Psychedelic Cafe. Tonight, I want to talk about Dr. Stanislav Grof. In his honor, I'm wearing my unofficial Stan Grof t-shirt. So I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about who Stan Grof is, what his basic work was, and why is it important. So let's talk a little bit about Dr. Stan Grof. He was born in Prague, and he was trained up as a medical psychiatrist. And he was trained as a classically trained Freudian analyst with the couch and Freudian analysis and all that good stuff. And so he's working at the Psychological Research Institute in Prague. And the head of his department received LSD from Sandoz in 1955. And in those days, if you had a letterhead and any kind of an organization, Sandoz would just send you a big case of their high-quality LSD. So they started to work with this on patients and see what it could do. He had his first personal LSD experience in 1956, the year after I was born. And that changed his whole life because he had been getting fed up with the Freudian procedure in that people could talk about what was going on with them, and they would achieve an intellectual understanding of maybe what their problems were, but they didn't seem to be getting anywhere with really getting any relief from the pain or neurotic symptoms or whatever was going on with them. And so LSD, he felt, was blowing that whole system wide open. And so from about 1956 and 20 years forward until church law outlawed LSD across the world. And I consider the prohibitions against psychedelics to be a form of church law. And there's a long history of persecution of the midwives in Europe, the people who knew herbal stuff. They were put to death, folks, and it wasn't just a few people. So that's my basic thing about it, and I'll probably explain more about that later. So anyway, for the next 20 years, he supervised or participated in thousands of LSD sessions with people who had trauma and serious problems. And so he wrote books about what his experiences were and trying to come to some sort of understanding of the totality of what people were experiencing. This was the first of his books that I read, and it came to me quite serendipitously, and I won't go into that right now, but this is The Realms of the Human Unconscious. So I'm going to be talking about this book and perhaps LSD Psychotherapy, which is another book that he wrote. And so he did all this work, and you might ask the question, well, lots of people have written books and done work. But what I'm going to say about the work is I don't think anybody else has the depth of experience that Stan has. And why that is so is that in this country, and many of the research projects that were done involved a few high-dose sessions, special sessions for artists, and kind of like the MDMA research that's going on. It's a couple of MDMA trips and then some counseling before and after. But what Grof was doing and what his clinic was doing is they were taking people who were deeply traumatized, people who had been in World War II in concentration camps and through the war, and had some pretty severe stuff going on. And they put them through psychedelic sessions 30, 40, 50, 80, 100 times. And he got to see that people worked stepwise down through the levels of their being. And eventually, many of them came to a final resolution, and I call it combusting, that the roots, the root traumas combust, and they are no more. And that's the distinction here. It wasn't palliative. And so I think that's why his work is important. Now, I haven't read all the literature, and I'm no expert in the field, but I haven't heard of anybody who has that kind of experience where they took people again and again and again through the psychedelic experience and observed what happened. And there may be others out there that have done similar research. I haven't found it. Now, myself, I've done many, 80 and more LSD experiences, and they were therapeutically oriented. That's a big story, but what I can say in a nutshell is, by reading this book, by reading The Realms of the Human Unconscious, it allowed me to go into that stuff, because it's often really, really unpleasant. And if I hadn't had the framework, the intellectual framework to begin with, to recognize at least what the hell's going on when something really starts to surface, because you're going to want to run from it or suppress it, and to be able to allow that stuff to manifest and to start to work with it, no matter how chaotic and awful it is, and it can be. And that's one of the tricks to the book. It almost allows you to start to download. And that's a double-edged sword, because there's people who could take LSD 100 times and go to parties and look at the sky or whatever and have a pretty good time with it. But once you read a book like this, if you've been traumatized, you may just end up, digging into the stuff, and then you got to start to really deal with it. It's no joke. A friend of mine, Jean, she says, well, once you open the can of worms, you got to be somewhat prepared to deal with the worms. So, why this is so important is that we're in this psychedelic renaissance. There's a lot of interest in mushrooms. LSD research is happening again. People are in the underground working with these substances. And there's a lot of trauma out there. Like I've said before, I think 40% of people have some level of suppressed trauma. And a very interesting thing that Grof observed was that the staff at Prague all had to go through the LSD process. And everyone had some suppressions come out around birth or childhood. Some people only took a few sessions who weren't severely traumatized. But everyone had things that surfaced during the work. And so I'm convinced it's way more common. And this book and Stan Grof's other books will help to allow you to let this stuff up. So thank you for listening. Subscribe to the channel, and you'll find out when the next hot cup of psychedelic coffee comes out at the Psychedelic Cafe. Thank you.